News of the Times. The Abergavenny Christmas Massacre. Betrayal in the Castle. 1175. December. The darkest month of the medieval year. A time of feasting, fires, and fragile truces, when enemies might sit at the same table under the thin hope of winter peace. But in 1175, at Abergavenny Castle in Monmouthshire, a Christmas gathering became one of the most infamous betrayals ever recorded in the British Isles. A massacre so shocking that medieval chroniclers struggle to describe it without invoking words like butchery, treachery, and the breaking of all bonds of God and man. A slaughter that would echo across Wales for generations, so notorious that modern writers believe it partly inspired Game of Thrones' Red Wedding. And at the heart of it all, two families locked in a spiral of vengeance, a Norman lord seeking blood from an earlier killing, and a Welsh chieftain who walked into a hall believing he was breaking bread in peace, only to meet death at the table. Tonight, in our Dark December series, we go back nearly 850 years to an age of marcher lords, castle keeps, clan feuds, and kings who ruled by sword more than parchment. This is the Abergavenny Christmas Massacre, treachery at the Lord's Table, 1175. This is medieval cruelty at its most calculating. And in today's end of episode further particulars segment, it is 1738 in Faversham, where a man sets out to test whether an elderly woman was a witch, using a method so catastrophically stupid it could only have been invented by an 18th century idiot with a knife and far too much confidence. This tale proves what we know to be still true today. Superstition is dangerous, but stupidity is lethal. Before we begin, settle yourself somewhere comfortable, a warm drink by your side, the fire crackling if you're lucky, and allow the modern world to fall away for a moment. Tonight's story carries us back into the deep midwinter of the 12th century, where peace was fragile, loyalty was uncertain, and Christmas hospitality could be the most dangerous invitation of all. Make sure the cat has been ushered off the table, extinguish any suspiciously flickering candles, and prepare yourself for a tale that begins with feasting and ends in treachery. Because this is not merely history, this is news of the times. Abergavenny and the Castle, a frontier town on the edge of an empire. Abergavenny in the 12th century sat on one of the most volatile fault lines in Britain, a town between worlds. Abergavenny lies at the foot of the Black Mountains, where the River Usk and River Gavenny meet in Wales. Today, it's a peaceful market town, but in the Middle Ages it was a border settlement in the truest sense. To the west lay the Welsh kingdoms of Bryniddiog and Gwent, fiercely independent, deeply rooted and led by proud local dynasties. To the east, Norman marcher lords pushed relentlessly into Welsh territory, building castles as fast as the kings of England could approve them. Places like Abergavenny were neither wholly Welsh nor wholly Norman. They were pressure points where alliance, rivalry, and betrayal existed side by side. The early castle, a wooden stronghold. Abergavenny Castle was first built around 1087 by Hamilyn de Ballon, a Norman lord entrusted with securing the region. At this stage, it was a timber motte and bailey fort with a wooden palisade, a small garrison, and simple outbuildings for servants and retainers. These early castles were not showpieces. They were military footholds designed to dominate the local population and protect Norman power into the Welsh hills. From its motte, Abergavenny Castle commanded sweeping views of the Usk Valley, the road to Hereford, and the mountain passes towards Crickhowell and Brecon. It was a strategic location for both trade and defence. Life in Abergavenny, two cultures, an easy peace. By the mid-1100s, the town around the castle was a blend of cultures. The town held Norman settlers bringing new laws, taxation, and feudal customs to step with Welsh families holding fast to older legal traditions and land rights. At markets and fairs, where the two groups mingled out of necessity, tensions frequently simmered. Disputes over grazing, tolls, and land boundaries were common. Abergavenny Castle acted as both a fortress and a warning. Abergavenny under the Marcher lords. The castle eventually passed to the powerful de Braose family, one of the most feared and influential Marcher dynasties of the era. Under their rule, Abergavenny became a mighty symbol of Norman authority and a base for military campaigns into Welsh territory, creating tremendous fear and resentment with the native Welsh population. With their power, the Marcher lords operated with extraordinary autonomy, building castles, raising armies, waging private wars, and dispensing personal justice with minimal interference from the crown. To the native Welsh, they were both overlords and interlopers. A brewing storm. By the 1170s, Abergavenny stood at the centre of escalating hostilities. Under increasing pressure, Welsh chieftains pushed back against Norman encroachment. Norman lords, like the de Braose family, responded to the native Welsh hostility with raids, reprisals, and increasingly harsh demands. The scene was ripe for a blood feud, with the castle a symbol of oppression and the site of long-nurtured grudges. Wales and the Norman Marchers. The Welsh clans. 12th century Wales was not a unified country. It was a tapestry of fiercely independent kingdoms: Gwynedd, Deheubarth, Powys, Gwent, each ruled by its own lineage of princes. These rulers commanded loyalty not from peasants who barely knew their name, but from clan and kin groups whose bonds ran as deep as blood. One such Welsh chieftain was Seisyll ap Dyfnwal, the lord of a swathe of land around Abergavenny. The Norman Marcher lords. The Normans, descendants of Vikings, had seized England in 1066 and spent the following century muscling into Wales. To manage this contested frontier, the English crown established the Marcher lordships, territories where Norman lords had near royal authority, raising armies, building castles, and their power base, administering their own laws and waging private wars. They were frontier warlords, and few would become more notorious than William de Braose, the new lord of Abergavenny in 1175. Old wounds. This story begins not at Christmas, but in early spring. According to A History of Wales, Volume 2, 1912, John Edward Lloyd, still one of the most reliable scholarly accounts for Henry was slain in Gwent by Seisyll ap Dyfnwal on the 12th of April 1175. It was the death of Henry which led to the massacre at Abergavenny. William was Henry's de Brose's uncle, and William was a man who did not forget a blood feud. The Road to Christmas. vengeance brewing. Within months of inheriting his lands, William de Braose began plotting revenge. But revenge on a Welsh chieftain was no simple matter. Wales was rugged, politically fractured, and full of men who knew the land far better than any Norman newcomer. Open warfare might end in a stalemate, so William settled on a plan that would be more effective and infinitely more treacherous. 1225. A lure is set. Chroniclers record that William issued invitations to Seisyll, his son Geoffrey, and several leading Welsh figures of Gwent. They were told to come to Abergavenny Castle for peace talks and to celebrate Nadolig, the Christmas feast. Truce was essential for such a gathering, and weapons would traditionally be left at the entrance. The role of being a host was sacred. In medieval time, breaking hospitality was considered a crime not just against man, but against God. But William de Braose planned to break everything. The royal decree, a convenient lie. Strife had continued between the Welsh nobles and William de Braose in the seat of power at Abergavenny Castle. William then came up with a plan. He played the part of someone willing to negotiate, to parley with the Welsh lords, and as such, he invited the lords to celebrate Christmas at his castle, where the two sides could discuss and come to a mutual agreement. William fabricated a lie of a royal decree saying that the new ordinance required all men to enter seats of power without arms. Welsh nobles who wished to parley for peace at the invited feast would have to leave their weapons at the door. But it was a trap from the start. There was no such royal ordinance. It was purely a ruse to bring the Welsh clan members together in one place. John Edward Lloyd again. Under pretext of a royal ordinance as to the bearing of arms, Seisyll, his son Geoffrey, and other leading Welshmen of Gwent were lured to Abergavenny and there set upon and slain without the slightest warning. The Christmas Day Massacre of 1175. Abergavenny Castle, Monmouthshire, Christmas Day. William de Braose, Norman lord, marcher, baron, and a man known for a pitiless vengeance, according to John Edward Lloyd's History of Wales, had spent the months since the murder of his uncle Henry stewing in resentment. Henry had been slain by the Welsh chieftain Seisyll ap Dyfnwal, a respected leader of Gwent. Among the Normans, honour demanded repayment in blood. Among the Welsh, the death of Seisyll's kin would ignite a fury that would smoulder for generations. But on this Christmas morning, the Welsh clansmen rode to Abergavenny, believing, or at least hoping, that a reconciliation was at hand. The invitation. The invitation from William de Braose had gone out with the promises of a Christmas feast, a parley, and a promise of peace between Seisyll and the Norman lord whose family held the castle. Brut y Treachery, the Welsh medieval chronicle, records the shock that many Welsh nobles were summoned under the colour of friendship. It was a dangerous invitation, but to reject it outright risked looking weak, dishonourable, or unwilling to seek peace. So Seisyll went, bringing with him his son Geoffrey and a number of his leading men. These were not simple farmers or foot soldiers. They were the backbone of Gwent's leadership. Inside the castle walls, Abergavenny Castle is still mostly timber in the 1170s, and it was festive and warm. Torches burned along the wooden walls. The long hall smelled of spiced wine and roasted meat. On the tables were trenchers of coarse bread, wheels of hard cheese, and jugs of ale. But inside the doorway was the first warning. All weapons were to be surrendered before entering the castle. William de Brose's men said it was a new royal ordinance. No man may bear arms within the king's peace. Now, whether the Welsh believed it or not, they complied. The swords, daggers and spears were stacked by the door. Seisyll and his men were now defenceless within a Norman stronghold. The music died down. The door to the hall was barred, and with that, the tone of the feast shifted. The betrayal. According to Lloyd's narrative, what came next was without warning, without even the pretense of negotiation. The Welsh nobles were set upon and slain without the slightest warning. Braose's men, fully armed, surrounded the unarmed Welsh chiefs. In the shock of the moment, there was little resistance they could offer. Contemporaries wrote of it as an ambush of the blackest treachery. Gerald of Wales, writing later, referred to William de Braose as a man who delighted in cruelty, and the massacre at Abergavenny was held up as the prime exhibit of that reputation. Some accounts say the Welsh were cut down where they sat at the feast table. Others say they were dragged into the courtyard and executed one by one. But all agree Seisyll was killed, his son Geoffrey was killed, and the benches of the hall ran red with blood. The ride of destruction. The slaughter inside the castle was only the beginning. De Brose's men mounted horses even as the Christmas feast lay in ruins, and, as Lloyd records, before tidings of their exploit had got abroad, had spread ruin far and wide in Seisyll's country. The goal was simple: wipe out the surviving kin before the word could spread. They rode straight to Seisyll's hall, where his wife Glodus and his 7-year-old son Cadwallader remained. According to the chronicle, de Braose's retainers carried Glodus off and slew the child in her arms. It was one of the most brutal scenes in 12th century Welsh history, a moment still remembered in the Welsh folk tradition, and one that medieval writers claimed infected the land with hatred for the Braose family name. A Christmas of blood and a curse. In medieval culture, blood spilt on Christmas Day was considered a curse on the killer. But William de Braose appeared unmoved. He had avenged his uncle, cleansed his honour, and sent a message across Wales: defy me and your entire lineage will be wiped out. If his intention was fear, he succeeded. The shock of the betrayal and massacre on Christmas Day under the auspices of peace were difficult to comprehend for surviving Welsh nobles. The massacre became a rallying cry for the Welsh princes, a symbol of Norman treachery and a reminder that under occupation no treaty was truly safe. And so, on a cold Christmas Day in 1175, the seeds were planted for decades of reprisals, raids, rebellions and retaliations that would reshape the political map of south-east Wales. Myths of Glodus and a family curse. John Edward Lloyd writes of Glodus's capture after the massacre that she was carried away as a captive, her young son slain in her arms. The silent captive. In some later retellings, Glodus was locked in the lower chambers of Abergavenny Castle, left to starve, her child taken from her. No medieval chronicle confirms this, but the rumour appears again and again in the 18th and 19th century antiquarian writing. The persistence of the tale says something important. The Welsh remembered her as a woman wronged beyond measure, suffering with a dignity the Normans never possessed. The curse of Abergavenny. One widespread border tradition claimed that as Glodus was dragged from her home, she uttered a final curse on William de Braose, that his line would know betrayal as he had dealt it. And strangely, the de Braose line did unravel spectacularly. His descendants fell out of royal favour, were hunted down, starved in dungeons, exiled, and eventually ruined. Gerald of Wales, writing only a generation later, famously observed that the Marcher lords often reaped as they had sown. To the Welsh mind, this was simply Glaudus's justice at work. What happened to William de Braose and his lineage? William, who committed the massacre, prospered for decades afterwards. He gained royal favour, expanded his lands, and became one of the wealthiest barons in the kingdom. But the chroniclers noted something unsettling. Never did he enjoy good peace, quoted by Welsh historian Brut wy Tywysogion. His end came not in battle, but in the most medieval fashion imaginable. He died while hiding in France, exiled by King John after a catastrophic falling out. His body was found naked and starved, a humiliating fate for a once great lord. Welsh poets wrote that this was the first stroke of Glaudus's vengeance. Matilda de Braose, starved to death by King John in 1210. William's wife Matilda, or Maud, was captured by King John and, according to multiple sources, murdered by being starved to death in Windsor or Corfe Castle. Chronicles emphasise the horror of this death, describing her remaining life as wasting slowly in the dark, calling for her sons. Upon her death, her body was so thin it shocked even hard-bitten medieval observers. This was seen as the second blow of the Glaudus curse, the mother of the line dying exactly as Glaudus supposedly had, starving in imprisonment. Their sons, executed, hunted or destroyed. The de Braose sons fared no better. William the Younger was hanged by King John, yes, that King John, in 1210, a deliberate humiliation for a nobleman. His brother Giles de Braose, Bishop of Hereford, tried to mediate between the family and the king, but died suddenly in 1215. Some said of illness, others whispered by poison. The third brother, Reginald de Braose, briefly reclaimed some lands after King John's death, but lived a life of conflict, constantly fighting Welsh princes. His rule in Brecon was so oppressive that history described him as a man of ill memory and many troubles. He died in 1228, troubled and lacking any happiness. Remaining brothers John and Philip de Braose were involved in endless disputes, losing territory and influence. Philip died in 1275, leaving no legitimate surviving heirs, and by the mid-13th century the great de Braose baronetcy had fractured, been sold off, or been seized. The once mighty dynasty scattered into minor cadet branches with no real power. The final humiliation, hanged by Llewellyn the Great in 1230. Although technically a different William de Braose, the grandson, this moment mattered for the myth. William, the grandson, was caught in an affair with Joan, wife of Llewellyn ap Llyworth, the greatest Welsh prince of his age. Llewellyn's punishment was medieval stagecraft. De Braose was hanged on Easter Sunday 1230 in full public view. The symbolism was unmistakable. The murder of Seisyll's line executed by a Welsh ruler on the holiest day of the Christian year. This, said the chroniclers, was the true moment the curse closed. The de Braose family collapses completely. After the execution, their castles were seized, their marcher rights were stripped, their name became associated with treachery, their estates were scattered across heirs and rival families. By the 14th century, the family was effectively extinct as a political force. Their Welsh lands passed to the de Bohun's, then the Mortimers, and then the Crown. The chronicles put it simply: the house that began in blood ended in disgrace. And in Welsh tradition, particularly in Monmouthshire, it was said that Glaudus's lament had worked its way through the generations, and that no de Braose would ever again prosper long in the shadow of Abergavenny. As for Abergavenny Castle, the castle did not escape the consequences of that Christmas bloodletting. In 1182, the Welsh struck back, and in 1233 they returned with fire, burning the castle in a deliberate remembrance of the treachery committed in its hall. It was rebuilt in stone, fell again in the Civil War, and stands today as an ivy-wrapped ruin above the town, a silhouette of history's long memory. Further particulars. And now for our further particulars, a story which proves that the greatest danger in British history has never been ghosts, ghouls or witches, but men who are absolutely convinced they know how witchcraft works. What follows is a tale from 1738 that takes place on St. Thomas's Day, a traditional day of winter almsgiving. The tale involves charity, a measure of wheat, a man of very limited intellect, and a tragically innocent woman who crossed paths with the wrong fool at the wrong moment. From the Derby Mercury, January 1738, Faversham. Murder of a suspected witch. A barbarous murder was lately committed on Jane Plain by Stephen Diaper, one of the most stupid villains that ever was formed into human shape, of which the story is as follows. Mr. James Bunce of Offspring near Faversham gives annually, every St. Thomas Day, a certain measure of wheat to every poor woman that comes and asks for the same. Among the number was Jane Plain, a poor woman of unblemished character, aged between 60 and 70 years, who was ordered by Mr. Bunce to have the measure. The villain who was ordered to measure the corn took it in his head that this poor creature was a witch, and bethought himself of a stratagem which he had heard to know them by. This was that no witch had power to receive more than a measure, which proved to be the death of this innocent creature, for her modesty was so great that she told him, as seeing the heap measure, that his master did not allow of it, nor did she desire more than he was willing to give. This, and this only, urged on her fate, for she no sooner refused, but he drew his knife and stabbed her, as I am informed, in above 40 places. Mr. Bunce was in the room at the same time, with a child in his arms and 2 others by his side. Not knowing where the villain would stop, his first care was to secure the children. Then, calling 3 others of his servants, went and seized the ruffian, who gloried in the action. That concludes this episode of Treachery, Curses and Bonds Broken, and we hope you found the journey into medieval Wales as gripping as we did. If you enjoyed the show, a like and a share does more than you'd think. It tells YouTube that we're worth showing to other lovers of history, mystery, murder, and the occasional Norman behaving very badly. It costs nothing, but helps us enormously. And if you'd like more, our Patreon shelves are absolutely groaning under the weight of over 750 historical crime episodes, including deep dives, exclusives, and our extended archives. Membership is only £5 and arguably far more satisfying than that slightly limp sandwich you brought at the filling station. There's also 2 new Patreon exclusive series rolling out this very week. And as always, thank you so much for watching. This has been News of the Times, and I am Robin Coles, part-time would-be Welsh knight, full-time avoider of medieval dinner invitations, and deeply relieved that my own family gatherings involve far fewer swords. And finally, could the last person out please straighten the welcome mat? We can't have anyone tripping on their way out of the castle gate. See you next time.